Tansei, welcome back to Metis Minute, your source for Metis news in Region 7. Welcome back to Metis Minute. I am your host, Samantha Loney, and today we are bringing you a story about nuclear waste management. As you may know, there is currently still a search for where to put the Deep Geological Repository. So this is a place that will store used nuclear fuel. The two locations that have been narrowed down are South Bruce here in Region 7 and Ignis in Region 1. There is a duty to consult with Indigenous peoples. So the NWMO has been engaging with the Metis community both here in Region 7 and Region 1. And we wanted to bring you one of their community engagement sessions where they discussed the transportation of this nuclear fuel, along with information on how this fuel will be transported. We also got a lesson on nuclear itself. Nuclear energy can be scary. That is why it is important to educate ourselves on what nuclear fuel is, what the dangers are, and how it is going to be handled in the future if these deep geological repositories are put in our region. Now, we are not nuclear physicists or scientists, so we wanted to bring you that engagement session here today.
And on behalf of Very Simcoe Métis Council and the NWMO, we're very pleased to welcome you to this community session. Now, right off the gate, I want to say thank you to Phil's Catering. Wasn't it a great meal? And before I introduce our guests of honor who are going to be doing the presentation today, I just want to ask the members of Very Métis Council to stand up and accept your thankful applause of your citizens. Come on, ladies and gentlemen, stand up. Thank you. I have to tell you that I am so blessed with the best council in the world. So, they're also the funniest. So I want to tell you that I also want to say thank you to the NWMO because of their generosity, not only in sharing this presentation today, but there's over $5,000 in gift cards that are being handed out today thanks to the NWMO. So we're here today, and I'm going to introduce you to the NWMO representatives here, along with our staff person at the back, Taylor Monsert. Stand up, Taylor. Taylor is M&O staff, and she's consultation advisor on the NWMO file with the Lands and Resources branch. Close enough?
Perfect.
Okay, in no particular order, these good-looking gentlemen whom I'm going to introduce are as follows. James Weger. Stand up, James. Ulf Sommer. And last but not least, the boss, Joe Govery. So, this presentation is about the Deep Ground Repository. And James, do you want to take over from me? Because I don't want to steal any of the thunder.
Yeah,
Do you want the mic, or are you good without it?
yeah, so I'll take out some time while I'll set up the presentation. So yeah, my name is, for those of you that don't know, my name is James Weger. I'm a senior advisor with the Human Rights Management Organization. My primary role is to support the NWMO's ongoing engagement with Metis Nation of Ontario. Engagement that started all the way back in 2004, before Powell. The NWMO is committed to the Metis Nation of Ontario. We believe and feel that community feedback adds to like the development of this project and increasing safety. So the more that you know, the more that we know. Currently, Ontario uses over 50% of its energy use comes from nuclear energy. Used nuclear fuel is currently stored at the facilities where it's generated, which is Bruce Power, Pickering, and Darlington. We also see some used fuel being stored at Chalk River Labs, northwest of Ottawa, as well as a place called White Shell in Winnipeg, Gentilly in Quebec. That nuclear generation station in Quebec is no longer operational, but the used fuel is staying there for the time being. And there's also a reactor in New Brunswick known as Point LaPro. Combined with over 40 years, almost nearly 60 years now, 71, we have about 3.3 million used fuel bundles in storage right now. It's being stored safely, but the storage was always temporary. In 2002, the NWMO was mandated through the Nuclear Waste Act to find Canada's long-term solution towards used nuclear fuel. That is through a process that is technically sound and also socially accepted. So our project will not proceed without municipal, First Nations, and Métis people working together in collaboration. And so the big Austro Gabby, like that.
I think it's important. So just one stat. James mentioned 3.1 million bundles of used fuel in existence. Half of them reside in Region 7 territory, or down at the Bruce Nuclear Power Plant. So half the used fuel in Canada is at Bruce plant.
Yeah, and to stay with Bruce, Bruce is one of, if not the largest nuclear reactors in North America. And they are advancing isotope development as part of their business stream, where, at this past AGA, the chair of Bruce Power announced that they are committed to developing isotopes in Canada to combat cancer, with the desired goal of converting cancer to a molecule-like symptoms. Bruce Power is a huge contributor, to our economy. But with that as well, isotopes, radiation. We know radiation so well that we have harnessed its power to save lives. So we understand how radiation will respond in what we're proposing. Today I brought in, at the last minute actually, Ulf Sommer, a good friend of mine, incredibly brilliant. He's here to speak about transportation. We were just speaking earlier today that when he came to the NWMO, he didn't know the nuclear industry. He was a transportation expert. So he learned about the nuclear industry and radiation, on his own, and so he has a really unique way of explaining, the whole industry, and its complications, and its safety requirements in a very compelling way. So hopefully I haven't punched your tires too much. Ulf as well, we're at the stage, at the end of this year, the NWMO hopes to make its siting announcement. Remember that willing, informed host. We have 2 remaining locations. In 2010, we started our siting process. 22 municipalities voluntarily came forward and expressed interest to host. We're down through a screening out process. We're down to 2 remaining communities. One in South Bruce, which is about 45 minutes south of Bruce Power, and the other is in Ignis, which is about 4 hours northwest of Thunder Bay in northwestern Ontario. We are targeting the end of this year. to identify that site, with an informed and willing host. That doesn't mean that we put the shovels in the ground. We then enter a 10-year regulatory phase and a 10-year construction phase. Even though we're talking about transportation today, in all reality, if everything moves like clockwork, we won't be transporting used fuel until the 2040s. So there's a lot of opportunity to learn and to share your thoughts and interests, because your thoughts and interests will help build the whole transportation aspect of our project, and as well as the safety of what we're proposing all together. So we invite you to share a dialogue. Don't hold your questions to the end. If you have questions, if something that all says or something that you see on the screen triggers a thought, please share it. And we'll spend the rest of the afternoon, with dialogue. I'll be taking notes. With that, please join me in welcoming All Star.
Thank you. If I speak at this level, can you hear me at the back, or would you like me to use the microphone? Or no? Yes. I'm good? Okay.
Yep.
Excellent. Well, thank you for the introduction, James. My name is Ulf. I am a transportation engineer at the NWMO, and I've been there for a long time, in my 17th year now. I got a mechanical engineering degree from the University of Waterloo, and I went into engineering because I didn't like English or history, so engineering seemed to make sense. But ultimately, I went into engineering because I didn't have the courage to go into art. I would have rather been a visual artist, but I didn't think I could make a living that way. And engineering seemed like a good compromise there. So I still do art. I have a printing press in my basement. I do lino cuts. And it's, people sometimes say, oh, is that a hobby? And I'm like, no, electronics is a hobby. Building things is a hobby, but art is sort of something that you have to do. You have to do. And so while I don't get to do it as often as I'd like, every now and then it comes out and I do a bunch of printmaking, and then it's like, why don't I do this more often? And there we go. So as James mentions, I fell into the nuclear industry sort of by accident. I had a bunch of friends working in it. They kept saying, oh, I want to join the nuclear industry. And I'm like, nah, I don't think so. I really like getting my hands dirty. I worked as an engineer, designing brakes for trains for about 10 years. And I lived on the shop floor. I learned what people working on the shop floor call engineers, and I thought, my goodness, I don't want to be called that. But working with them, I certainly realized where they were coming from, and I thought to myself, yeah, if I were them, I'd be calling engineers the same thing. So that's been a constant struggle in my life to make that balance, because engineers design things for people who have to use them, and so remember who the user is. That's true in communications as well. So I learned that history was really, really important, and I learned that communications was really, really important. So the things I really hated at high school, I ended up realizing that they were probably more important than the engineering that I did learn. And so what I'm going to do today, like James said, please interrupt, please ask questions if you have them. I will do my best to answer or pass them off as appropriate. I've been in the nuclear industry for 25 years. We're first working in low and intermediate level transport, and 17 of those years in the fuel level transport. And I thought I'd share my journey with you about radiation and nuclear so that you can learn a little bit of the stuff that I learned, and then we'll talk a bit about transportation after that. Is that good? Awesome. So let's see if this works. I'm hoping you can see the slides. Apologies for the low screen, which were a little bit higher, but so the energy mix in Ontario. James already gave a little bit of this away, but let's start off with fossil fuels. What fossil fuels do we have in Ontario? Coal? Yeah, actually we don't. Not anymore, you know. I asked my son, we used to drive to the US, he's a soccer player, we used to drive to the US quite a lot for soccer things. And we actually shut our last coal plants down in 2012 or 2013. And about 5 years later, we're crossing the Skyway in Burlington. And I asked him, you know, passing Hamilton, and Hamilton's always, from the Skyway, looks kind of dirty. I lived in Hamilton for 10 years, I loved it there. So I lived just south of the steel mills. But I asked him, do you know what a smog day is? And he said, no. And that to me was it was awesome, because up until 2012, smog days were in the news like every single day in the summer. And then 5 years later, I'm like, do you know what a smog day is? And he's like, no, never heard of it. And yes, so we don't have coal in Ontario anymore, yet about 30% of the world's energy comes from coal. So, you know, just get that in our minds. We do have fossil fuels. We do burn mostly natural gas. So apologies, it's way down there on the side there. And we do have a bunch of renewables. We've got hydro. That's our biggest renewable. And each unit here is worth 1, so 1%. So just from a standpoint, you can see we've got more hydro than we do natural gas, and we've got a bunch of wind, and we've got bio and solar, less than 1%. And James said the rest of our province is powered by nuclear. That's right. Wow. 53% last year. So these numbers change over time. So if you look in the spring or you look in the fall, they aren't necessarily, you know, exactly this mix, because in the spring they tend to shut the nuclear power stations down and do maintenance. Why? Because we have a pile of hydro. In the fall, there's less hydro, more nuclear. So we have a mix. It changes. There's actually a really cool app. It's called Grid Watch. You can pull it up on your phone. It's for Ontario, and it gives you a live reading of Ontario's power mix. But not only that, you can it'll actually tell you what station is producing how much power and where that station is. So it is a really cool app. No, I'm not getting any royalties from advertising that, but I use it quite a lot, and it's quite interesting to watch. So, nuclear is radiation, right? Radiation, oh, that's scary, right? Well, absolutely it can be, but we live in a world filled with radiation, and there's a pile of different types of radiation. So the first one that perhaps we'll talk about is the one in the middle, visible light. You can see me here standing here today because we can see visible light. You know, in that spectrum, we can see that. And we've heard of certainly most of these things. My words on the slide there. Ultraviolet rays, you've probably heard of as well. Somewhere in the ultraviolet spectrum where the wavelengths become shorter, over on the left-hand side they're longer, and when they become shorter, they become more powerful and more penetrating. And so somewhere in the ultraviolet spectrum, radiation becomes powerful enough to knock electrons out of orbit. And that means it can change things. So if you have an atom and you take an electron away, that atom is now physically changed and can have different properties. And so we call that ionizing radiation. So somewhere in the ultraviolet spectrum and over to the right, it becomes ionizing. We have to protect ourselves from ionizing radiation, so what do? When we get an X-ray at the dentist, they put a lead vest on us because they want the X-ray to be on our teeth, or they want our X-ray to be on our arm and not the chest, or we're protecting our organs from the stray radiation because it can potentially do damage if you get enough of it. But we also protect ourselves from the non-ionizing radiation, which is over to the right. Exactly. Left, over to the left, my right. how do we protect ourselves there? We put sunscreen on, protect ourselves from UV radiation. We put glasses on when the light is too bright. I know even it didn't seem too bright on the way up here this morning, but I had my glasses on because it was really foggy. And strangely, in fog reflects a lot of light, so I had my sunglasses on even though I couldn't see the sun. And infrared radiation is heat, and we protect ourselves from the heat by sometimes putting a hat on in the summer or other ways, or we stand in air-conditioned buildings. That means that radiation is all around us, right? Well, let's talk about radiation, what the radiation we think of when we hear radiation, and that is the nuclear type, like the scary type of radiation. It's around us everywhere. It's even in us. So across the world, and I'm going to take a look at, you see the world, Canada, Toronto, and Winnipeg on my slide here. Across the world, the internal, we get there's 4 ways we get radiation. And one is from internal sources. So we have potassium in us. We also have carbon in us. There are radioisotopes of potassium and carbon, potassium 40 and carbon 14, that are radioactive. And so we are actually radioactive. And so if you're really scared of radiation, don't sit next to someone because they're actually irradiating you. Not to the point that you can do damage, but you are getting radiation from them. Across the world, that's pretty similar. People are pretty similar in physical size, and so the amount of radiation or potassium and carbon we have in us are generally fairly similar. So across the world, that's pretty even. However, we also get radiation from space. That's cosmic radiation. And that radiation comes from space and it comes to the Earth, and depending on where you live, the higher up you are, the more cosmic radiation you get, and the closer you are to sea level, it's fairly consistent. So again, across the world, you can see that this blue bar here is pretty similar in thickness across. So we get that. There's nothing we can do about it. We're getting that radiation from space. The next type I'm going to talk about is external radiation. So this is radiation from the ground that we live on, from the building products we use to build our buildings, and things like that. There are trace amounts of uranium in granite, and so we use rocks and various other building materials, but if we use rocks to make concrete, guess what? The concrete is radioactive because it's got little chunks of granite in it. When we make bricks, there's radiation in those. In fact, Grand Central Station in New York City is actually quite a radioactive building because of the granite and marble that they used to build the building. And so if you walk in there with a Geiger counter, it'll go off simply because of the building products they used. We're pretty fortunate in Canada. We actually are lower than about half that of the rest of the world, what the background radiation from the materials around us are. So that number is fairly low. It's actually lower than the internal radiation in us. But you see across the world, it's fairly similar. And the last type of radiation that we get is from the air that we breathe. Now this is really interesting. So we're pretty close to Toronto, right? And you can see that this number is a heck of a lot lower than living in Winnipeg. So I've got my spoiler on my slide already. This type of radiation, you can trace back to nuclear bomb testing. You can trace radioisotopes to Chernobyl and Fukushima, but it's dominated by radon gas coming naturally from the ground through the decay process of that uranium that I said, trace amounts of uranium are effectively everywhere. And as that breaks down, it creates radon gas. That's a gas, we breathe that in. I have a silly little story about an open house at Pickering where someone was there back when they did open houses and let everyone in. It was a rainy day, and they went into Pickering, and someone stood in a puddle, and this actually happens frequently, but in this case it was a red person, which was no radiation protection training, and if a red person gets contaminated at a nuclear facility, it's a reportable event, so it's a big issue, but this person was standing in a puddle outside. When they went back into the station alarms went off because they had radon gas on their boots from the puddle they were standing in. All naturally occurring, big news, internally with regulator, because now you've got a member of the public who became contaminated, but it had nothing to do with the nuclear facility whatsoever. It had to do with the fact that they stood in a puddle on an open house, and they
Define red person at a nuclear plant.
find a red person at a nuclear plant.
Well, let's be like,
Yes.
We all want to know the answer.
So, it's an excellent question. So, they use a color scale at a nuclear plant to determine, which essentially tells you how much radiation protection training you have. So, a red person at a nuclear plant is someone who has no radiation protection training. The lowest level is orange. So I was orange badge at one point, which allowed me to walk around the nuclear plant where I was qualified, because orange badge is facility specific. So I was orange badge at the Bruce, but I was never orange badge at Pickering and Darlington, so I always had to be escorted when I went to those facilities. The next level is yellow. And I don't recall exactly what you're allowed, certain things you're allowed more than the orange, and the highest is green. And when you have green badge, you are allowed to assign radioactive work. And so as a yellow or orange badge, I have to do what my green man or green person says in terms of if I'm allowed to enter that work area or not. So there's a very rigid structure within the nuclear facility, and so it goes red, orange, yellow, green. Yes.
I always wondered what color badge the guy in the picture who's standing over the swimming pool holding the spent fuel rods would have. Because he wasn't even in any gear.
He could be as low as orange. Because as an orange, you're allowed to do radioactive work. You don't necessarily, but it's supervised by the green person, right? And so it could be any of those, but it could be as low as orange, but unlikely red.
And all the radiation in the rods is being held safely by the water.
That's correct. That is correct. So, we're comfortable with the fact that we live in a radioactive world? Now, if you look at my scale here, because I didn't talk about numbers. I'm trying to do nuclear without numbers, but I'm going to put some numbers in just to give context. Background dose, and my unit is in flight hours per year. And that's, who's heard of that unit before? Very, I made it up. But it is, no, but I made it up intentionally to help people understand radiation a wee bit better. And so, if you're flying in an airplane, are you closer to the sun than you are on Earth? Yes. So the background radiation that you get in an airplane is about 15 times higher than it is on the ground. We didn't talk about, I'm going to talk about that in a second. I have to talk about Winnipeg. Why is Winnipeg so high? And why is Toronto so low? So I'm sure you were wondering about that, and we got there, but then I got distracted by red people.
Altitude and Canadian Shield?
Excellent, yes.
Maybe because they have more factories or something that produce more, like, gas?
Yes, and the factories, I'm going to say perfect for you, but the factory is a natural factory. So what happens, what type of soil is predominant in Ontario? Is it sand or clay? Clay. We have a lake right next door, right? And it's here because if the soil were all sandy here, would the lake be here?
No.
And so we live predominantly on clay and on bedrock. In the prairies, they have much sandier, drier soil. And so that natural factory that this young lady was talking about is the ground, the factory in the ground. And that uranium is decaying, but there's not so much water in the soil, and so the radon gas comes up more. So it's as simple as that. But elevation does play a role as well, because Winnipeg is slightly much higher than the GTA area here. And so that plays a role. So segue into that, we're now in an airplane. We get roughly 15 times the radiation that we get on the ground. Now it's really, of course, we're getting the internal radiation, but are we getting radiation from external sources? Are airplanes radioactive? Not really. Are we getting the inhalation, or are we getting the inhalation? Yeah, but it's going to be slightly different. The vast majority of the dose that you get when you're in an airplane is cosmic, right? But it allows me, because we understand the idea of traveling for an hour in an airplane, I can say, oh, it's an hour flight or 2.5 hours from Toronto to Winnipeg. That gives you something to, gives you some context. So using the idea of the fact that if you want to know how much time it would take to get a certain dose, I can take the dose divided by the dose rate you get in an airplane, and that then gives me the time equivalent spent in an airplane to get that dose. And so that's what I call flight hours, and I have this little chart. You can actually look it up on Wikipedia, and I'm not going to get into it in any too much detail, but here I've got eating one banana is equivalent to spending 1.5 minutes in an airplane. Living in a brick or stone building is equivalent to 17.5 hours in an airplane, so that's like a flight from here to the Far East. And this is annual. Sleeping next to someone, you get the equivalent of a 5-hour flight. So from the person you're sleeping next to over the year. So now we can start. This helps us put things into context. So that dental X-ray that we're afraid of getting at the dentist, it gives us 2.5 hours of lifetime equivalent dose. But just living in Toronto, we get 400 hours. And so if we're getting 400 hours a year of natural background dose, should we be scared of another 2.5 hours we get from the dental X-ray? Probably not, especially when people in Winnipeg are getting 1,000 hours. So all I did in putting this together was try and put context to around low doses of radiation, the fact that we are living in them, and that many of them we don't really need to be worried about because the doses are so low that they really don't make any difference. Does that make sense? Did you like that? Like I said, lifetime equivalent dose, you can take a look at it on Wikipedia. I've got another chart which only looks at medical. I look at, 30 or 40 different medical procedures, and some of them give you a lot of doses. Yes?
One more analogy when we're making this slide, you'll hear others say, when you work in a nuclear plant, you have a simulator that tracks how much radiation you have. And at a certain point, you can't work in the radiation or that's just part of the protection. But every airline pilot will get more radiation, be exposed to more radiation than they're going to work than a nuclear plant worker.
Yes. Yes. So the limit for a nuclear worker is higher, but on average, what Joe was saying is absolutely correct. I was taught Orange Badge at the Bruce site by a green man. Now Now, we all know what all that means. We've gone through these definitions. That green man had a hyperactive thyroid. He took radioactive iodine for health reasons to control his thyroid. After he had the first pill, and this is, I'm telling you this because this is what he told us, he walked into the room where they have on all the monitors, and it's probably at least the size of this room here. He walked in and set off all the monitors in the room. Why? Because of the iodine in his thyroid. He couldn't walk into that room for over 6 months because of the medical treatment he had received. And so he had to do office work and not work in the plant, because the plant measures how much radiation you are emitting going in, because if they don't and you get contaminated, they can't tell if it was from you or from the station. And so you have to be pretty clean going in, because then you can measure how much you got coming out. And so they measured you both directions, and he couldn't go in because he was too radioactive. And so, it was a real eye-opener for me, where I said, if I'm sitting in the hospital, I have no idea who's sitting next to me. If I'm scared of radiation, I want to work in a nuclear power plant, because they measure everything and it's so easy to detect. But that's perhaps not the point of view that many of you might have had coming in here. I'm scared of radiation, so I'm going to move and work in a nuclear power plant. But it's actually, it'll tell you, because they monitor everywhere, how much radiation you're receiving. So how does a nuclear power plant work? Well, we have fuel pellets. They look like these. You can see, can you see those held up? I've got 9 fuel pellets over here on this side. I can't do left and right. I'm really terrible at left and right. This is my left and my right hand. See, I almost got it wrong there. And it's on your left side. But over here, the black things are fuel pellets. They are actual size and dimensionally accurate. I'm a parts guy, an engineer, if I have the wrong pellets, they just don't look right. These ones, they're not uranium, and everyone sort of laughs when I say, and they're just mock-ups, they're not uranium. And they laugh, well, they wouldn't allow you to carry uranium ones, and you're absolutely right. They won't allow me to carry them, but I could if they would allow me, but they won't, because uranium is a controlled substance, because you can make, you can put it through a reactor, and it can create plutonium, and plutonium you can use to make bombs. That's why they won't let me carry them. We actually, were you on that tour, James, in December when we went to the facility where they make these? No. So I live in sort of the mid-west end of Toronto, and about 20 minutes walking away from where I live is where they make these pellets.
In the middle of Toronto.
In the middle of Toronto, yeah. And so if you want to know exactly where, if you're familiar with Toronto, it's on Lansdowne and Dupont. So if that makes any sense, So it's sort of the west end, but sort of central west end Toronto. And they make these pellets there. And so I said, when I went, I've always wanted to tour. And so last December I got my dream came true, and I got to go there, and we went in. We had to wear lots of protective equipment. We had to wear booties so that our shoes wouldn't contaminate the floor. We had to wear lab coats and safety glasses. Yeah. And then I said, can I hold a pellet? And they said, yeah, now we have to put gloves on too. Because I had to put gloves on because they didn't want me to contaminate their pellets. Because when the pellets get contaminated and they go into a fuel assembly, and that fuel assembly ruptures in a nuclear reactor, that's bad, right? Not a good thing. And so, and then they get charged, like financially charged. They get, and they're like, no, we don't want you contaminating our pellets. But the cool thing was, we walk into the room, and there are pellets everywhere. And so I'm like, should I be scared of these? Well, after they come out of the reactor, yes, but going in, these people are working right there in downtown Toronto where they make them. So we'll talk, so what happens? Just really, really quickly, in a reactor, there's the pellet. They take neutrons and they bombard the uranium with this little subatomic unit, the neutron, and it causes the uranium-235 isotope, which is only 0.7%. So a tiny amount of this uranium would be uranium-235. The majority would be uranium-238. But the neutron hitting the uranium-235 atom causes it to break apart. And what did we learn in chemistry class when you break chemical bonds? What happens? You get heat. Yes, it goes, I think was the answer. But no, you get heat. We use that heat to go through our steam generators to generate steam, and then we have it, we put the steam through a turbine, the turbine turns and generates electricity. The challenge with the fission reaction is it's not very efficient, and these things that the uranium turns into are different elements, and there are like 2,000 different types of elements that it turns into, and some of them are crazy radioactive. And so while I could hold this pellet before it went into the reactor, when it comes out, it's 1.5 trillion times more radioactive than it was going in. That's a lot of zeros. That's a 1 and 12 zeros. That's how much more radioactive it is going in. I'll tell you a little bit more about that let's see, what's my next slide? Oh, here I'm talking about what we use in Canada, we call natural uranium. So what that means is we refine the uranium, because we dig it up, uranium ore, we refine it. What I mean by that is we extract all the uranium so that there's no other impurities in it, so it's straight uranium, and then we make fuel out of it. And so 0.7% of that is uranium-235. The rest is uranium-238. And so that's, if you had 1,000 dots here, which I do roughly, it's actually 1024 for those of you who are counting. I know the guy in the back there was like busy trying to count. Yeah. So 32 times 32 is 1024, I think. But 7 of those now represent the uranium-235 atoms. If I release a neutron so I shoot a neutron in and it hits a uranium-235 atom and it releases another neutron, what's the likelihood of hitting another one of those yellow dots? Is it high or is it low? It's pretty low, right? There's a lot of chance you can miss, right? What the US reactors use is they use enriched uranium. And so they enrich their uranium to 3 to 5% enrichment. And so I know the guy up here is counting, so I'm going to tell you there's an error in my slide. This is only enriched to 3.5%, not the 5 that I say in the title here. There's 35 dots. If I release a neutron from one of these in slightly enriched uranium, what's the likelihood of it hitting another yellow one? Much higher, right? And so the fundamental difference between a CANDU reactor and a light water reactor like they use in the US and much of the rest of the world is that this is like a diesel engine and this is like a gasoline engine. If I take a control, like if I take the spark plug off my car when it's running, is it going to continue to run? No, it's going to cough, sputter, and try to shut down. If I have a diesel engine and I take all the controls away except for having the fuel and air in, what happens to the diesel engine?
It's not gonna work.
Actually, quite the opposite. It's why it wants to keep going. You can take everything away, and it says, as long as I have something to eat, I'm going to keep going. And that's the fundamental difference. What the U.S. type reactors are trying to do is they're trying to control their reactions to keep them from running away. The CANDO reaction, we're trying to control it to keep it going because it wants to stop. Why the difference? Enriched uranium was needed to develop the Manhattan Project. They needed plutonium, which is a side effect of this, and they wanted larger amounts of plutonium so that they could develop a bomb. If you do that with natural uranium, it will take a long time. They didn't have a long time. They were in the middle of a war. So they enriched their uranium to get that plutonium to build that bomb, and if it wasn't them, it would have been my guys, I guess.
You're Canadian now.
Yeah, I was born just in Toronto, so I've always been Canadian. But yeah, but my ancestors, they were on the other side. They were trying to do the same thing, and I'm really glad that the U.S. won this one. They chose that to continue their nuclear program, whereas Canada, from a non-proliferation perspective, that's a word that I always have a hard time saying, and I did it, I'm proud of myself today, thank you. We chose a different approach. One of the side effects of that, so we've got 0.7, what do you have to multiply 0.7 by to get to 5? 7, right? 7 times 7 is 49, right? And that's pretty close to 5. I'm an engineer, this is close. And so they have 7 times more dots at 5% than we do. That means they can produce that means that 1,000 units of uranium can produce 7 times as much energy. And so when we're talking about fuel waste, and this is gonna, I'll tell you about that in a sec, there's 7 times less waste. So one of the drawbacks of our program is we have a higher waste volume than the light water reactors do in the US. So that's one of our challenges, but that's okay because we can deal with that. You can see here are my fuel pellets, and you can see 3 AA batteries. Then this is Canadian. This is CANDO reactor. Those 9 fuel pellets will power the average home for a year. So here I have 9 fuel pellets. I'm sort of holding them up. I don't drop them all over the place. But here are my 9 pellets, and my box is only big enough for another 2 batteries here. But a home run on 100% nuclear, we run our homes on 50% nuclear because that's roughly where we are, produces a waste volume that's equivalent in size of 3 AA batteries. That's pretty impressive, isn't it? So when we're going to talk about fuel volumes in just a sec. A fuel bundle has about 1,150 of these pellets in the bundle, and it's about the same size as the fireplace log. It's actually pretty close to full size on screen here. It stays in the reactor for about 15 to 18 months or so, at which point we remove it and we put it into storage. We'll talk about that in a second. Any questions? Yes, as well, yes. And so actually thank you, appreciate that. It's a great question. So no one's disagreeing with me that this is hazardous waste, right? We all agree that uranium coming out of a reactor is hazardous waste. And I just told you it's 1.5 trillion times more radioactive than it was going in, and that's a scary number, right? Batteries, are they hazardous waste? They are. Our nuclear program started in 1971 when we opened Pickering for electricity production. We had fuel before that because Canada actually worked on the Manhattan Project at Chalk River as well. So we had a small amount of fuel waste, but it's just tiny. Our nuclear energy generating started in 1971. We know where every single one of these pellets is. We can account for every single one created since 1971. Statistics Canada, if you read the reports, I'm a geek, so I read these reports. They tell me that 55% of us throw these in the garbage. So we're putting hazardous waste in our garbage. Where does our garbage go? Landfill, which is on surface. We are putting these 650 to 750 meters underground to make sure that they never come in contact with potable water. I know what I'm scared of. Let's move on.
So, to say it clearly, you're saying these are going to get buried how far?
650 meters underground if the site is in South Bruce, and 750 to 800 meters underground if the site is in the Ignis area.
So, how many stories if it was a building is
Well, 600,
650 meters?
it's
deeper than the CN Tower.
1.5 times the
Right.
height of the CN Tower.
So they're not going in like that though, are they?
They're going in like this.
So they're going in those things.
Yes, and then
That look like a little
yeah,
fireplace
and-
log.
yes, and we put them into a container, and then we put that container in clay, and then we put that container underground. So I will
The height of
show.
the CN Tower.
Yeah, I'm 1.5 times the height of the
Where
CN
no
Tower.
water can get in and out.
Exactly.
Whereas we're dumping the batteries in our landfill
Yes.
10 feet, above the surface with rainwater, and they're breaking down and leaching out.
Yes. Yes.
So you're saying, I'm afraid of those batteries, I'm not afraid of this. That's what you're saying.
That's what I'm saying.
Okay.
I think this is still scary at times, but long-term storage, I'm not concerned. The operational side, can things go wrong? Yes, I can't tell you that we're perfect. We won't be, right? We're human. Yes.
I know this is an offshoot of what you're saying, but in regards to the batteries, so our household, we live in a bag that was given
Yes.
from our, what, since you do all this things, what do they do with that bag with those batteries?
In the landfill, no, there are a hazardous waste collection, when you go to the transfer station, obviously, I live in Toronto, we don't have any landfills, we dump our, and I'll get to that, we dump our stuff in London, Ontario. But it's true, unfortunately, but when you go there, they have a hazardous waste area where you bring your hazardous waste and your electronic waste, and they do separation, there's certain recycling and certain chemical separations that they do. I can't speak to how effective it is. I know with plastics, this whole recycling may not perhaps be as good as we are led to believe. It's not an area I can speak to. But a good question. A good question. If you find out, please let me know.
Well, when it comes to batteries, I can take them back to my local superstore.
Yes.
They have them going to cool.
So there are collection, and I don't know, I tend to keep them in my house, and the bag gets bigger and bigger, and then. Yeah, but, yeah, no, we don't have enough time for all this in the stories. So, remember I said a fuel bundle, and I would have liked to bring one, but I did find out, and I was away for the last 2 weeks up north. So a fuel bundle is about this big, so if I walk around going like this, it's not because I'm trying to scare you, it's not a scary movie. It is because that's roughly how big a fuel bundle is. Like I showed you on the previous slide, it was about full size. If you're old like me and you work in imperial units, they're about 18 inches long and 4 inches in diameter. If you're younger than me, which most of you are, then it's 50 centimeters long and 10 centimeters in diameter. So they're giving off a huge amount of heat. In fact, coming straight out of the reactor, that fuel bundle is giving off enough heat to brew a pot of coffee in 20 seconds. That's a lot of heat. It's about 28,000 watts of heat energy. When it's 1 year old, the heat has dissipated dramatically. At 1 year old, it's giving off the same amount of heat as a 60-watt light bulb. You can burn yourself on one of those. I know I've done that, tried to change one when it was on. It's like, wow, I probably should have put gloves on. At 10 years old, it's dropped to 6 watts, which is, yeah, believe it or not, this is what Christmas tree bulbs used to look like. And night lights, perhaps still use them, but they've gone all LED as well. But you could hold on to a Christmas tree light bulb as long as you wanted. It would be warm, but you couldn't burn yourself on it, right? And so at 10 years, the heat has gone from, enough to brew a pot of coffee in 20 seconds to, yeah, I can hold on to it and it's warm. And I don't know if any of you have gone on the dry storage tours and you've had a chance to touch a dry storage container. They are warm. Because one dry storage container has 384 fuel bundles, and if you multiply that by 6, it's about 2,000 watts. So that's a bit more than your average blow dryer going full blast inside the dry storage container all the time. Now let's talk about radiation. What was the number I quoted? 1.5 trillion? What does that mean? That's a huge number. And it is, it's a huge number, but it doesn't really mean much, right? We talked about regulatory limits. So if I'm a red person, I'm working at or I go to a facility, I'm only allowed to receive at most 1 millisievert a year. That doesn't mean anything to me. If I'm a nuclear energy worker, I'm allowed to receive 50 millisieverts a year, so 50 times more. Well, let's put this radiation hazard in terms of me being a nuclear energy worker. So I'm working at a facility and I have a fuel bundle and it's lying over there. Should I be scared? Probably yes. Run. But that changes. Like straight out of the reactor, if I'm standing 1 meter away, so let's assume this is my fuel bundle, and I'm standing 1 meter away, I get the maximum regulatory limit that I'm allowed in 4/100ths of a second. So that's 1.5 trillion times more radioactive than it was before it went in. Is that scary? Oh yeah. Oh yeah, that's why I said run away. You don't want to be anywhere near this. But we put it into water-filled pools. Water is a really good shield, and it's good for cooling, so it works well for my previous slide, and it's a good shield, so it works well for this slide. And so that person that you see leaning over is safe, and they don't need any special more protective equipment. Why? Because that water is providing that shielding. When the fuel bundle is 30 years old, which is the average age we're going to get it when we start processing it underground. Obviously, we started in 1971, so that fuel is already 50 years old. And James said we're not going to start moving anything until the 2040s, so it's now going to be at least 70 years old. We're going to have really old fuel, but we'll have younger fuel as well. On average, we're estimating about 30 years old. At 30 years old, standing 1 meter away, it is now 1 million times more radioactive. So that's still a lot. That's still a big number, more than 1 as it was before it went in. But I can stand 1 meter away for 18 minutes to get that regulatory dose, the maximum annual regulatory dose. So from a hazard perspective, is it still dangerous? Well, yeah, because if I'm standing this far away, I can only stand here for one episode of This Hour Has 22 Minutes, and then I better get the heck out of there. Whereas, but it's a whole lot longer than the 4/100ths of a second. So that means from a first response perspective, I can actually walk up, do something quickly and walk away. I can do some, emergency response and still be okay. And so the hazard of the stuff that we're working with is vastly different than the hazard in the nuclear station. Does that make sense? Yes.
The water that you mentioned is used for cooling.
Yes.
Is that water contaminated?
That's an excellent question. And are there trace amounts of contamination in the water? Absolutely. They filter the water to keep it clean, and those filters become intermediate level waste. And the reason we want, so there will be contamination in the nuclear, in the heavy water, and when you pull the fuel bundle out, there's going to be contamination on them. We want to keep the fuel base, Ontario Power Generation and the fuel owners, I don't work for them, I work for the NWMO, but we, from an industry perspective, want to keep the fuel base as clean as possible, because when storage vessels, like the dry storage container, are put into the fuel bay, when you pull them out, if the bays are dirty, there's a huge amount of effort required to clean the outsides of them. If they're clean, there's a whole lot less work. And so we do, is there a trace amount of contamination? Yes. How much there is, I can't tell you, but they do a really, really good job of keeping the bays clean. And have people fallen into the bays over their years and survived? Absolutely, absolutely. So I went up to Chalk River, and they told me of at least 2 instances where people fell into the bays, not intentionally, but they have fallen in, and then it's a big event. But I mean, you can survive it for sure.
So then the water is filtered out at the end, and is it reused, or is
Yes.
it sent out?
No. It is like a swimming pool, and just like you have a filter in the swimming pool to keep the swimming pool water clean and your chemicals at the right balance, they do the same thing.
So to be clear, it's not being dumped into Green Lake.
Absolutely not. Absolutely not. But it is fresh water, so it is not heavy water in the pools. It is just fresh water. They use the heavy water in the reactor to slow the neutrons down to make the reaction happen. Because if the neutrons move too fast, they won't actually cause the uranium molecules to break apart. You need them to go slower for them to break them apart. And so they use the heavy water as a moderator. That's what they call it.
So, like the water being contaminated, it's not something as simple as because the water is surrounding the source of radiation and therefore it's getting struck with radiation and then it becomes radioactive and it's always radioactive from that point. No. In the fission process in the reactor, because it's so hot, that scaling starts to form on the bundle, on some of the bundles, and that scaling is radioactive. When it goes into the fuel bundles or into the fuel bays, that scaling can break off the fuel bundles and enter into the water. That's what's radioactive. That's what's contaminated the water. And when you pass it through the filters, it's the filters that pick up that scaling.
Yes,
right?
absolutely.
So, like this, I like to give the example that this isn't the Incredible Hulk where you get hit with a dose of radiation and then you yourself become radioactive. No, that's the comic books, it's not real life. That the only way you become radioactive is if you ingest a radioactive emitting particle, and that particle is emitting radiation still.
Exactly. So the fuel is giving off radiation, but if you shield it, you're not going to, it's like the sun. You can't get contaminated from the sun, right? If I get sunburn, if the sun can damage me, I can get sunburn, but I can't walk over to someone else and rub it on them and they get sunburn from my sunburn. Whereas if I put cream on me, that is like contamination, and now I would walk over to someone and I can transfer the cream to them, right? So contamination is sort of like, it is particles that happen to be radioactive, like the scale that James is speaking about. It's not, while they can be radioactive, they emit radiation, and if those particles end up on you, that's contamination. But you're not getting contaminated by standing in a radioactive field. As soon as you get out of that field, the radiation's gone and you're clean. Does that make sense? I've got a question over here.
How does quantity affect that 1 meter rule? If you had a small capsule in your 1 meter weight, is it the same danger as a whole bundle?
No.
So quantity has
Yes.
a piece to play in that.
So the numbers that I am listing are for a single unshielded fuel bundle. If you were talking about a pellet, the hazard would be different because the activity, the amount which, and by activity I mean the amount of radiation coming out of that pellet is different.
Let me change the question then. Is 1 bundle as dangerous as 10 bundles in the same distance?
It doesn't necessarily scale by a simple multiplication. It's a difficult question to answer because now you have to talk about orientation. And I'm going to use a water bottle and my phone as 2 objects. If you're being exposed to both of these now, and so the exposure you're getting may be double, but not necessarily, depending on where you're standing. But if you put one behind the other, then this is providing shielding from this, right? And so if you have, so in order to answer that question, it's sort of like the scene in the Holy Grail when Arthur is crossing the bridge and the bridge keeper is asking the question, what's the light speed of a swallow? And Arthur responds, African or European? And so I'm doing you ask the question, and I'm saying African or European, because if I don't know more information about that question, I can't answer it. Because if you put all 10 fuel bundles behind each other like this, then this number is the same. If you put all 10 beside each other, then that answer is not the same. So it is very, you have to put it in the right context, right? So yes, it can be greater, but it may not. That's like a political answer, isn't it? I should rethink my career here. Yes. They use a transportation package called the radioactive filter transportation package. They're very clever with their names. And they ship them from Darlington and Pickering to the Bruce low and intermediate level waste storage site, and they store them in what they call tile holes, which are essentially steel tubes that are about 30 feet long or 10 meters long, about 5 feet in diameter. What's the equivalent of 5 feet? 1.8, 1.7 meters in diameter or so, and they put them underground, so shallow underground, they are retrievable. And so when we have a low and intermediate level waste storage facility, they will take those and put them in there. It is in-term storage as well. Excellent question, thanks. I said we're going to talk about transportation, and like an hour in, we haven't even started yet. Sorry about that. So this slide here, I'm going to go through it fairly quickly, but the radiation we've been talking about so far has been the gamma radiation, the penetrating radiation, but that's not the only type of radiation. We have alpha as well. And alpha is interesting because it's the most ionizing, and what that means is it has the highest ability to remove electrons out of orbit. So it has the highest ability to change something. So it's actually really pretty dangerous. But it's more like a particle, and it's not very penetrating. And so alpha can't get through our skin. Then there's beta, which is less ionizing, but slightly more penetrating. And my graphic here isn't quite correct because I have it traveling through this person's body. It'll go millimeters into your skin, but it couldn't go all the way through. And so it is more penetrating than alpha, but not very penetrating. But you can thin aluminum, and so when you see the people in the some hazmat or radioactive work areas, and they're wearing those aluminum suits, it's because there's concern that there's beta particles present, and those those suits will not shield gamma, but they will certainly shield alpha and beta particles. Then we have the penetrating gamma rays and X-rays. Gamma rays are naturally produced and X-rays are effectively the same thing. They are produced by us. They are very, very penetrating, and the only thing that stops them is things that are really dense. And so I guess I'm pretty good at gamma shield. And then we have neutron radiation. Neutrons are subatomic particles, so they're really, really tiny. When they hit something large, they just bounce off. And so density does not do a very good job shielding them at all, because the neutron just bounces away. Light things, so those of us who remember the periodic table, and they're numbered like 1 to like a pile of numbers, like over 100 at the end. The ones that have the lowest numbers, they're better for stopping neutrons than the heavier ones. And that is because they're more light in size, because we're talking a neutron is a subatomic particle, and if it hits something that's really big, the chance of it moving it is not very much, and so it doesn't lose any energy. Whereas if it's hitting an atom that is more like in size, that atom can absorb some of the energy and it'll slow the neutron down. Does that make sense? So why is that important? Well, it is really important when you understand the longevity of our repository. So when we're working in it and building it, we have to worry about the gamma radiation. We don't have to worry about alpha or beta radiation because the container blocks the alpha and beta radiation. We don't really have to worry too much about neutron radiation either, because gamma typically dominates. And so as long as we control gamma, everything's good. However, that changes. I can't plot neutron radiation here because neutron radiation is continuously produced, but it decays really quickly. And so if you have a neutron emitter, within 10 hours, it's decayed to nothing. And so I can't plot that on my scale here because my scale goes from 10 years to 10 million years, and the neutron stuff would just be gone. And so here you can see the gamma is the red line, the beta is the blue line, and the black is the alpha is the black line. At this point, the container does a really good job of blocking alpha and beta, so I need to worry about gamma. That's what we need to worry about at the facility. At 500 years in, which is interestingly, potentially 7 generations. So I just find that a really interesting coincidence. You know, okay, it's on the longer side, a little stretch, but within that indigenous knowledge framework, this sort of fits in, and I find that really fascinating that there are all these things start to line up. But within about 500 years, the beta and the gamma are flat. And so they're no longer a concern once the alpha has barely decayed at all. But what did I say about alpha? Can it penetrate our skin? No. For it to be hazardous, we have to ingest it. Well, of course, we're not going to be digging up a repository and starting eating the fuel. I just don't believe that people will do that. But we do have to worry about the water. Why? Because if we put this in the surface, like the batteries, and the alpha emitters dissolve into the water and get into our water stream, then we can get contaminated. And then we can get injured just like mercury poisoning. That's why we need to put the repository deep underground in an area where we have no potable water. It's not because of the gamma radiation, which we're scared of when we're handling the fuel. It's because of the alpha radiation, which we're scared of over a long term in the future. That make sense? I think we covered this night. James covered this slide. You know who we are by now, right? I'm going to talk briefly about this. We talked about the blue 1s and 2s. Those are the sites where we're looking to possibly site a repository, and hopefully we'll make a decision sometime later this year. To James's point, 2, 3, and 4 is where 93% of the fuel is stored. So 50% at the Bruce might even be 53, and then about 25% each at Pickering and Darlington. So that's where the bulk of the fuel is stored. We also have a tiny bit of fuel in Manitoba at Whiteshell Laboratories. Number 5 is Chalk River. That's where the Canadian nuclear program started. And then Gentil and Point Lepreau in Quebec and New Brunswick, respectively. Gentil was shut down in 2012 because it only provided Quebec with maybe 2.5% of its energy mix, whereas 50% is nuclear in Ontario. So they have a pile of hydroelectric. The one single reactor in New Brunswick provides New Brunswick with roughly 30% of its power. So it is, it's an important part of their energy mix. Dry storage. So we talked about the wet storage, that we put the fuel into the wet bays for 7 to 10 years, then we take it out to make room in the bays, because else we have to make bigger and bigger bays. And rather than doing that, we take the fuel out because it's no longer super hot. We can put it into dry storage. They use steel and concrete structures. These weigh about 60 tons, and they hold 384 fuel bundles, which give off roughly 2,000 watts of heat energy. That's why they're warm to the touch when you walk up to them. There's 20 inches of concrete and an inch of steel, half an inch on either side, shielding you from the radiation. And so you can walk around these facilities without any additional shielding because the dry storage containers provide the shielding from the gamma. Of course, the beta and alpha can't get through all that. Any questions on this?
So inside each of one of those is one log?
Sorry?
Inside each one of those giant casks, is it one of those like logs you're talking about, or is it a whole bunch inside each cask?
So each one of these has 384 of those fuel bundles in it. Let's talk, I think I have a slide. Yeah, let's talk about this slide first. So we have currently 19 operating reactors in Canada, 18 of them are in Ontario. We had 22. Those 19 reactors produce 85,000 fuel bundles a year. That's a big number. Sounds like a big number, right? If we stack those fuel bundles like cordwood, they will fit into 4 tractor trailers. We talked about Toronto and the municipal waste that the city of Toronto produces, and I'm not talking the GTA, I'm talking about the city of Toronto. They produce, I live there, we produce 60 tractor trailers of waste a day. A day. 60, 29 of those go into landfill in London, Ontario. Every single day. The nuclear industry, to power 50% of Ontario's energy, produces 4 tractor trailers full of waste a year. A year. 50% of Ontario's energy. My son's a soccer player. We talked about 3.3 million fuel bundles that exist today. That sounds like a big number. Well, 3.3 million fuel bundles stacked like cordwood would cover one soccer field just a bit taller than me. And that is 50% of Ontario's energy for the last almost 50 years. We will have, the new numbers are coming out soon, we will have about 6.4 million fuel bundles generated by our existing fleet of reactors. That would fit on one soccer field as tall as a giraffe, which is just slightly taller than your average semi-truck. And so, from a hockey perspective, don't want to leave hockey out, I don't want to go just soccer, but from a hockey perspective, if you think of a standard single rink arena, it would, all those 6.4 million fuel bundles would fit into one arena. Just one, like I'm talking about, space along the sides as well and up to the top. but it would fill one arena. And that's like 80 years worth of 50% of Ontario's power. You know, and if we had light water reactors, we'd have 7 times less. You know, so we actually have more fuel waste than the American reactors do. Interestingly enough, we have, let's say, 20 reactors. The US has 100. Their fuel waste volumes and our fuel waste volumes are pretty similar because they produce more energy from their uranium. So our fuel waste volumes are pretty similar, so our repository and their eventual repository will be pretty close to the same size. I'm throwing these out to you to hopefully make this this kind of crazy nuclear science a bit more understandable. Is it working? Are you doing that? Yeah. Awesome. So what do we plan to do? We're going to take these pellets that we have here. They are in a fuel bundle, and as we know, it's a solid. The fuel is it's a solid. It's not a liquid or a gas. I'm sure I'm sure James has told you that many times in the past. It doesn't burn. Yeah, it can't explode. It doesn't readily dissolve in water, and it can't go critical. What that means is that there's not enough energy left inside of it. The uranium-235 atoms, if you squeeze them all together and put them all in one place, it still won't start a spontaneous nuclear reaction. And so it's really radioactive, but it's pretty benign. As long as we take care of the radiation, nothing's going to happen to our fuel. And so we're putting it into a copper and steel container. The steel is for structural strength, the copper is for corrosion protection. Then we're putting it into bentonite clay, and we're putting that 650 to 750 meters underground in a repository. The footprint on the surface is about 1 kilometer by 1 kilometer, so 1 square kilometer, and underground it's about 2 by 3 kilometers, so about 6 square kilometers. And that is for 50%, the waste from 50% of Ontario's power for 70 to 80 years. So these numbers, while the numbers sound big, it's actually really quite manageable and reasonable. So, how much does that cost? It's crazy. I came up, driving up today, and it said there was a $28 billion infrastructure project for Ontario for rebuilding roads. Our project is roughly the same price. Those are big numbers, you know. I don't know, I really don't know what it feels like to be Elon Musk or Jeff Bezos, who, those people might be able to understand $28 billion. I certainly can't. But if I take my $28 billion and divide it by the number of fuel bundles that we're going to have, the 28 billion was related to 5.5 million fuel numbers, because I know someone in the back is probably going, I'm going to use my calculator to see if Alton's actually doing the right things. And every 5 years we do a life cycle cost estimate to estimate how much this is going to cost, to tell the the energy producers how much money they have to put away into the segregated fund to pay for James' my wages. And the program. So we do these calculations, and the last time they came out was in 2021. We had a $26 billion program to store 5.5 million fuel bundles, and one fuel bundle cost about $4,700 to store. But if you put that in terms of our 9 fuel pellets, it's $40. One-time storage cost to take care of the waste from your home for a year. And you're already paying for that, because about 0.5 cent per kilowatt hour goes into the segregated fund from the nuclear. And so thank you for paying your electricity bills, because it keeps me employed. I really appreciate that. Transportation. I'm going to start off by saying we are, and I'll have to slide on this, we are incredibly regulated. Transportation falls under Class 7 of the dangerous goods. There are 9 types of dangerous goods. Radioactive materials fall under Class 7, and every shipment in Canada that contains dangerous goods has to be placarded. We are actually a fairly large transporter of Class 7 radioactive materials. Yes?
What's more dangerous than radioactive material to transfer?
Explosives, and dried, a pile of those fertilizer chemicals, oil and gas, I would say is more dangerous, and a lot, almost everything, actually, I would say. And the reason I'm going to say that, exactly, Roxanne here is stealing my thunder because of package design. And we'll get into that, yes. So we actually make about 2,000 shipments of Class 7 radioactive materials a day in Canada. Not a year, but a day. We make 760,000 shipments a year. That's crazy. Did you know that?
Where do they go?
Where do they go? That's an excellent question. Where do they go? 50% of those shipments are for industry. So we're talking gauges and sources to do inspections, soil inspections, pipeline thickness inspections, these types of things. So 50% of those shipments do, industrial things. And then we have another about 40% or more which support the medical industry. So we have nuclear medicine and radioisotope shipments. We are a large, James was talking about this already, we are a large supplier of radioisotopes for the world. And so we make a pile of international shipments. And the way they do these things is they create radioisotopes which have very, very short half-lives so that they can do their medical thing and they can disappear from you because they decay to nothing, so they're no longer helpful, which is really great, but that means from a transportation perspective, if something is going to decay within days, if you don't get it from where it was created to where it's going really fast, it's going to be useless by the time it gets there, right? And so we do produce a lot of the radioisotopes. The reason we do, why Canada is positioned that way, is because our CANDU reactors can be refueled and defueled while they're running. And so they have special fuel bundles that they stick into the reactors which which are used to create radioisotopes, and they can pull them out essentially at will. Whereas the light water reactors they use in the US, you have to shut the entire reactor down and then pull out that portion and then fire it back up again. And so economically it doesn't work quite as well as the CANDU ones do. But that makes us a big supplier. Only 4%, about 4% of the radioactive shipments made in Canada a year support the electricity production industry. So that's a pretty small number. When we're talking our program, we're not going to add significantly to that 4%. Remember I said 760,000 shipments a year. We're producing radioisotopes. We're going to add roughly 625, 650 shipments a year from the interim storage sites to the repository. And that is roughly 2 to 3 shipments a day, 6 days a week, 9 months of the year. And why we say that is, I've traveled a bunch in Northern Ontario. I was just there for 2 weeks, just got home last week. They are very, very concerned about transportation because they see road shutdowns all the time. It doesn't matter what time of year. There are more in the winter, but that doesn't mean that the summer doesn't have any road shutdowns. They also have washouts, they have forest fires which shut roads down. So there are a pile of different reasons why a road might be shut down. If we assume that we are going to do just-in-time delivery to the repository is going to be down a lot of the year because we can't get transportation shipments there because of a variety of reasons. And so in order to compensate for that, we ship slightly faster to get our annual volume there in less than a year to make sure that they have continuous production at the facility. So like I said, 2 to 3 shipments a day, 6 days a week, 9 months of the year. We are also looking at road transport. and shipments won't start until the mid-2040s. We're also looking at rail transport. We are only looking at rail transport for the fuel coming from the Ontario power generation sites, Pickering, Bruce, and Darlington. The reason we're not looking at rail for the other sites is because they don't have enough fuel, and most of them, they pulled up the rail lines. So it makes rail shipments more difficult. We have to truck it to the rail line, and then might as well just truck it there all the way. But that's a really, really high overview of our program. We are incredibly regulated. Road transport is provincial, and so it really goes by a provincial level, but there's this whole cascading hierarchy of regulations. The provincial regulations actually say if you're shipping dangerous goods, default to Transport Canada, and the National Transportation of Dangerous Goods Act and regulations, and the Transport Canada regulations say if you're shipping Class 7, we will take care of the training requirements, the emergency response requirements, and the placarding requirements, but anything else with regards to used fuel or radioactive materials transport is handed off to the Canadian Nuclear Safety Commission. And so this slide is actually from the Canadian Nuclear Safety Commission website, and it defines roles and responsibilities. I'm not going to read them all because I'm sure this is kind of dry and boring stuff. So, technical engagement to build confidence. What the UK did in 1984, because they were shipping these transportation packages with fuel in them, is they thought it would be clever to take a train and crash it into a transportation package. So I think over here in just a minute, what they did was they put a transportation package on a rail car, flipped the rail car on its side, and put it at 45 degrees to the train. So that's yellow box here, so that the train coupler would hit the interface between the lid and the body, trying to drive it open. And this crash was successful. The driver was not injured. Did you see him jump out? No, it was remote controlled. The package was not damaged. And why was the package not damaged? Because of a robust regulatory framework. And this is where I'm super proud. The international transportation regulations, which the Canadian Nuclear Safety Commission follows for the Canadian ones, they first came out in 1961. However, that was their first stab at the regulations. And one of the things they realized was that transportation accidents can occur, and they can be extreme. And they want to make sure that transportation packages carrying dangerous things, to the gentleman's point, what's the most dangerous thing on the roads, or what's more dangerous than used fuel. They wanted to make sure that there wasn't an inherent danger. And so they decided, if we can set a series of regulatory tests which demonstrate the package will not fail in even an extreme accident, then the radiological hazard goes away. And that's what they did. So they set a series of tests. Those tests were published in 1964. And while the regulations have been updated regularly since then, the tests, those original tests, which they put together in 1964, have not changed. They are still exactly the same. And that makes me really pretty proud. I'm going to actually, let's see, no, I thought I had a slide. I thought I had a slide on that, and I don't, so I'll talk to that. What the regulations say is a transportation incident is usually an impact, a penetration, and a fire. And it's usually in that order. And so they said, with the same specimen, you have to demonstrate that it can survive a 9-meter drop onto an unyielding surface, fall up in the worst possible orientation, followed by a 1-meter drop onto a pin, in the worst possible orientation, followed by a fully engulfing 30-minute, 800 degrees Celsius and fire. And every single severe transportation accident has been examined since then by the industry to see if those regulatory requirements need to be changed. At no point have those requirements been changed, with one caveat, and that is tunnel fires. If you have a fire in a tunnel, you can get incredibly severe temperatures. And so you can exceed the thermal conditions around a transportation package and potentially have it breach, especially if you have elastomeric or rubber seals, they can potentially melt. And as a result, what the jurisdictions where they have tunnels have done is they've said, if you're shipping Class 7 radioactive materials, you're not allowed to ship them through a tunnel with any other dangerous good at that time. However, those are institutional controls. People can override them. In Ontario, we're pretty, actually across Canada, we're in certainly where the nuclear facilities are, we're in pretty good shape. We don't have very many tunnels, and the tunnels that we have, there is one rail tunnel, but it's a single line, so that'll never be an issue because there's only one rail line going through that tunnel, so should we take rail, there won't be another dangerous good on our train at the same time. There are tunnels going under the St. Lawrence in Montreal. We would never take them transporting fuel from the east to Ontario. So I can stand here and really, really proudly say, I do not believe that our transportation packages, after 25 years in the industry, I don't believe that our transportation packages would fail in a transportation accident in Ontario. I can't think of a situation where they would. To give you an idea of this 9-meter drop test, of the severity of the 9-meter drop test, imagine if you were standing on a beautiful day like today on a 10-foot diving board and you're going to dive into the bay over here. What would happen? Has anyone ever done it? I'm sure you have. I learned this year, I used to say dive head first, and I was in Nova Scotia this year, and I was about 10 feet up, and I'm like, I don't say head first. And I'm not doing that. No, 10 foot, 3-meter diving board, head first. And I won't dive head first from 10 feet. No, I won't do that. But you'd probably, feet first I totally would, and I have. And so you dive in and you come up again, you say, wow, that was pretty refreshing, I'm going to do that again. And this summer in Nova Scotia, I did exactly that. I dived up to the bridge and jumped in again. If you were due to do that in late January and there was this much ice on that body of water, that ice would become an unyielding surface to someone like me. And the impact that landing would have on me would be very, very different than the impact in the summer where I'd come and do it again. When you're talking transportation packages as heavy as ours, and our package here, this one here weighs 30 tons empty and 35 tons loaded, even a rock wall is not an unyielding surface. And so there are effectively no unyielding surfaces out there. So the tests that we do to demonstrate that they can survive these transportation incidents are valid. And that means that I can stand here and say, throw it at me, I don't think that our transportation packages will fail. The one we've designed around road transport weighs about 35 tons. Why does it weigh 35 tons? Because that's about the maximum we can put on a truck and still be legal weight and legal size. So these are legal size, legal weight trucks. We don't need special permits. We do need a license to transport from a security perspective. We do need a certificate for a transportation package design. Both of those come from the regulator, from the Canadian Nuclear Safety Commission. But the package itself is solid stainless steel. The body of the package is 27, the walls are 27 centimeters thick, or I can steal your pad here, about 11 inches thick solid stainless steel. So the empty package weighs 24 tons, the body, another 4 tons for the lid, and then I've been riding my bicycle to work for 25 years now, and I wear a cycling helmet. So the transportation package also has a helmet on it to make sure that the lid and the body stay attached in those severe accidents. There are actually 32 bolts, and each bolt is about this big and weighs 13 pounds. The reason we have so many is because when you do these impacts, you can actually get the lid to flex, which is kind of crazy. The lid is this thick and it flexes. It's kind of, I'm like, wow. But we put more bolts in to make the area, or the bridge part between the bolts shorter, and then there's less chance of it flexing, so we make sure that the lid stays on. So there's all these cool little design features. We also have a boss on the lid here, which sits in the package cavity, so that if you try and push the lid off, it doesn't push bolts. So if the bolts fail, it doesn't matter, because the lid, this takes the shear load and not the bolts. And so that way we can make sure that the bolts don't get damaged in these accidents. We're also looking at potentially transporting the dry storage container. Those are big packages. There you'd have to put the impact limiter, the cycling helmet on the top and the bottom. And so now the dry storage container becomes 3 meters by 3 meters by 5 meters and weighs 100 tons. Much more difficult to move by road. It can be done, it's called a super load, but it is challenging. That's how we would move these packages by rail. Then over on the far side over there, we've got the basket transportation package. Because the non-OPG facilities store their fuel, they're using the same fuel bundles, but the way they store them is different. They store them in baskets. So they have a basket transportation package which holds 60 bundles, and so we put 2 of those into the basket transportation package for 120 fuel bundles total. That would also be shipped by road, weighing slightly less, maybe 30 tons loaded. Here I've got just a couple slides. We do have a full-size, functional, used fuel transportation package. So there you can see the bolts. You can see the one gentleman holding a bolt. You can see the stainless steel walls. You can even see me in the background there. It's crazy. This is what the package looks like when it's put together. And here are a couple more views of the transportation package itself. You can see how robust this is. So to your point, have I answered your question? There's a cool app. Again, I'm a geek. So there's a cool app. It's called the Emergency Response Guide. It's actually a book, and every single first responder has one of these books for the app. And if you look and you see a placard, dangerous goods placard on a vehicle, you'll see the numbers, and you can type in that number in the app, and it'll give you emergency response information, so that if you're a first responder, you have in your pocket your automatic, quick reference. This emergency response guide applies to Canada, US, and Mexico, so it is international. It covers all 9 classes of dangerous goods, and what it says, for every single UN number, it gives you an immediate precautionary measure where it says, if you see this number, you set up a perimeter around this incident a certain distance. And for every single Class 7 shipment, there are 25 UN numbers which relate to Class 7 shipments. There are 6 guides which relate to the Class 7 shipments. And so the 25 numbers fall under 6 guides, depending on what type of radioactive material you're shipping. Every single one has the same distance for radioactive materials, regardless of what you're shipping. Any idea what that distance might be? Would you be surprised if I told you it was the lowest in the book? Would you believe me? We're getting some yeses and some no's. It is the lowest number in the book, and it's 25 meters, so that's about 75 feet. So, you set up a perimeter of 75 feet in radius or 25 meters in radius. And talking to several first responders, they told me they never set up a perimeter that small because they need a bigger one simply for crowd control. So they want to control their scene, they don't want anyone in the scene, so 25 meters isn't big enough. But it is big enough for every single Class 7 shipment out there. That's something I can be pretty proud of. So here we have a couple slides where we're looking at actual physical drop tests, and we do computer modeling. And our computer modeling is really, really good now. So the regulations actually allow us to have a package certified without doing physical tests. I'm not sure we necessarily would. We in Canada haven't done full-size tests. We did them on a half-size package, but the computer modeling that we can do of the drops and of the fires is incredibly good now. So we can do so much of this work analytically without having to do these physical drop tests. Here's the same one around a fully engulfing fire. Just a little story on the fully engulfing fire. The where they came up with a half-hour fire was that's effectively the amount of burn time you can have of a single fuel, fuel-filled rail tank car. If it all pools into one area and should burn, you get about a half an hour fire out of there. In an incident, it's incredibly unlikely that your transportation package would be sitting in the worst possible spot. And they actually call it fully engulfing, and so you can see that the transportation package is actually suspended over the fire. So we can do levitation too. It's pretty cool. So this is actually an incredibly severe test. A silly little story about this test in particular. Again, this is only a half-size model that was built for the test. It was done at an NRC, National Research Council facility in the late 1980s. And there's a guy he's wearing that for heat. But because a fire of this scale creates a microclimate, it's drawing air to support the fire. In order to get the fire to be fully engulfing is incredibly hard, because as soon as you start drawing air, you create a wind. And if you create a wind, it pushes the fire on one side, and then you don't have a fully engulfing fire, so you're actually cooling a side and heating the other. And so they decided they wanted to do this test in a building, and they did, and they almost imploded the building. And that was only for a half-scale test. So these tests are incredibly severe and incredibly, at times, incredibly difficult to actually do. That's where computer modeling is really quite helpful now. Maybe I'll just end, because I've talked for way too long, and apologies. Hope it's been interesting, but maybe I'll just end by saying, going through the regulatory framework that we need for transportation. So if you want to be a driver, you need your AZ, and then you license, and then you need a clean CVOR, whatever that acronym stands for. It's a clean driving record. And then you need dangerous goods training. And then you need Class 7 radioactive materials, dangerous goods training. And then you need training for shipping used fuel. But then, because we have trace amounts of plutonium in our used fuel, you need security training and you need security clearances, because you have to be trusted so that you're not going to drive off somewhere else. And then you need your orange badge training, because the likelihood of you becoming contaminated during transport or becoming significantly exposed during transport is incredibly low. We can calculate all that. In fact, a driver would only see about 90 hours of flight time equivalent dose. Nice, pulling that back in. And so that's less than a flight crew would get. And actually doesn't even need to be a nuclear energy worker, but they do, because they go into the facilities, and should they get contaminated at a facility, that would be really bad. And so you need all the radiation protection training just to be a driver. Because of that trace amount of plutonium in our fuel, the security regulations kick into force, and they are given on a per shipment basis, because there are unique things for every single shipment. The driver, the escort, so we need to have a nuclear escort, but the names of the drivers and escorts are going to change from shipment to shipment. The times, the routes, other particulars about the shipment are going to change. So, and the threat, the potential threat might change from one shipment to the next. And so in order to get that license to transport, to make a single shipment, all of this needs to be in place and taken care of before the shipment can proceed. And like I said, that has to be done per shipment. So to move our 6.4 million fuel bottles, we're making in the neighborhood of 36,000 shipments. We have to have a license to transport for every single one. So we're going to be talking a lot with the regulator. So, yes?
What time of day are these shipments going to be out of the roads? And the other one is, will there be training for drivers not to use their cell phone when they're driving? Today's generation.
Absolutely. I can't speak to, we already have requirements in place for cell phone use for driving, even for me. I can't speak to what will be in place 20 years from now, but I would hope, and I would say yes, they should not be using cell phones. Their shipments will be 100% tracked, and so we will have multiple types of either GPS and satellite tracking on every shipment. The shipment will also be escorted by a nuclear escort, and so it has to be, so visibility between the escort and the shipment has to be maintained at all times. And your first question, I answered the second.
What time of day on the road?
Oh, and yes, so scheduling is going to be a challenge. When I say 2 to 3 shipments a day, there are a number of regulatory requirements that say we have to avoid peak traffic times in large urban areas. We should be trying to avoid high population areas. We should be trying to avoid environmentally sensitive areas. Of course, all those things need to be addressed, but we don't know where we're going yet. And so one of the challenges that I have with our regulations is that all of that information is what they call prescribed information. And so even if we did know, I wouldn't be allowed to tell you. We don't know, we are aware, we are doing a high-level planning for that, but at this point, we don't know what location we're going to. So doing any additional detailed planning doesn't really make sense right now. Have those items being identified, and are we aware of them? Yes. I can absolutely say yes to that. Exactly how that will play out over the next 20 years, whether the regulator will change the regulations to allow us to talk about transportation routes, I can't speak to that. In the US, they are allowed to. They have a different regulator, but they also have different fuel. And so while they have higher amounts of plutonium, they require armed escorts. We do not, because we don't have very much plutonium in our fuel. And so when we're so in our Canadian regulations, is there an armed escort requirement? Yes. if you have enough plutonium. We don't. So there are differences, but our regulator has said we don't make very many of these shipments, and at this point in time, that information is prescribed, which makes my job, our job, talking transportation routes a lot more difficult.
So, if 80% of the spent fuel rods are at Bruce,
Up to 50.
50%, sorry. How far away is the proposed site in Metis, and how far away is the proposed site in Bruce area?
Well, the one in the Bruce area is a whole lot closer for all,
20 kilometers, 10
it's,
kilometers?
no, I think it's probably about 50.
Okay.
But regardless, it's closer. One of the, this question,
Now says what, 2,000 kilometers?
yeah, maybe,
By
yeah,
road,
yeah.
like slightly shorter.
It might be 1,800 or so from this area up there, but 2,500 if we're talking Brooklyn Road. Certainly a lot less total kilometers driven to a southern site. However, remember I talked about the life cycle cost estimate that we do every 5 years? Well, we do it to the northern site, but we also do the calculations for the southern site. And I was the one who did, I built the cost model for that, so this is an area that I'm particularly familiar with, and we're just undergoing the modeling for the upcoming life cycle cost estimate in 2026. The cost difference between the two sites in dollars for you and me is huge, but in dollars in comparison to the project cost is pretty small. It's about $700 million cost difference. So when you're talking a $26 to $28 billion project, 700 million isn't a large amount. It is for, I don't know if this is correct. But willingness, in terms of willingness of hosting the facility, ends up trumping transportation costs. And so, and ultimately the rock type, I mean, both, the long-term safety is, again, I'd like to think transportation is more important than this, but it's unfortunately not.
You mentioned broadband, studies actually show that we have less water utility down here in Bruce than it is.
That's true, but both meet regulatory requirements in
Correct.
spades.
So that doesn't affect the cost. So the 700 million difference is the cost of drivers, fuel.
Yes. But ultimately, willingness ends up being the driver. So we get yeses from the indigenous communities and the municipalities in both. We get to make a choice. As we grow, the communities, the indigenous communities and the municipalities are really driving our choice. We
And
fit,
what if we get both communities saying this?
well, then we have a choice to make. That's about my paper.
At any rate, are there any more questions? There we go.
So thinking about Alera, in
Yes.
the packaging, the rods come out of the reactor into the pool, out of the pool into the on-ground storage units, out of there into the transportation caskets, transported out of that, then into the containment area for packaging into the DGR. Is there any more packaging outside of that?
No, I think you've covered it.
That's too much.
Everybody, this is our regional counselor, Greg Garrett. Please give him a hand for going up there. Did everybody hear Greg's question? Because it's a very good question.
It is. So does anyone, do you all know what ALARA means? It means as low as reasonably achievable. And so as an engineer, I took an oath that public safety is paramount. And so in traditional engineering, that means make sure you design for the end user and make sure your design doesn't hurt them. When you're talking in the nuclear industry, it says make sure that the radiation fields are kept low enough that you consider them in your design as well. And so Greg is saying, aren't you doing a lot of fuel handling? And the answer, my short answer is yes. I wish we could go back in time and I wish we could change some things.
What about thinking ahead?
Thinking ahead,
Packaging them and storing them in the transportation caskets
Out.
after they come out of the pool.
absolutely. And so for small modular reactors, we have that opportunity. One of the challenges we have currently is we have 3.3 million fuel bundles sitting around in various types of storage. And the storage may not be suitable for underground disposal. And that means that fuel handling is required. So we do have to consider the ALARA, and from that perspective, there's an interesting challenge. So we've got our transportation package here. We've got a tie-down design, which requires a lot of manual work. We have a bolting design, which requires a lot of manual effort. That is putting an operator very close to the package. This package design was a proof of concept. And if you're doing one or two, it's probably just fine. If you're doing 650 shipments of these a year, we now have to consider alarm. And so I strongly believe that while the package design, it is certified by the regulator, and we can use it, is not appropriate. Remember I started my conversation, this is a brilliant segue, thank you so much, for wrapping it up. Remember I said, I know what people on the shop floor called engineers?
Keep in mind, I am an engineer.
If I were an operator operating this package day in, day out, I would be calling those engineers the same thing.
A lot of the risk is already taken away by doing a lot of the doing it robotically, so
Exactly.
innovation now will reduce the risk as well.
Absolutely, and that's true for in-facility. One of the challenges is that is less true for transportation. So in transportation, we're actually dosing people up more than in any other job in the facility. And it's not the driver getting dosed, it's the people that are closing the packages and tying them onto the. So we've got lots of opportunities for making improvements, for sure.
We'll call them the non-engineers.
Yes, that's very, I have modules in this picture. So with regards to fuel handling, James is pointing out that the fuel, each module has 96 fuel bundles in it. And when we're doing this fuel handling, for the most part, we are handling 96 fuel bundles at a given time. It's only when we take the fuel out of these modules and put it into the long-lived copper and steel container that we're doing the fuel handling by fuel bundle. So I don't know if that effectively answered your question. Hope it gave you some more insight.
No, I just wanted to make sure I understood it right.
I've known Greg a long time, and Greg always goes too long. Too long. Greg, like in his leadership role, likes to, leave us with a moment. So thank you, Greg.
Just for you, James.
So, on behalf of everyone here, James, I just want to say thank you for an incredibly informative and entertaining presentation.
Yes.
I'm going to go back and quiz my husband on a few of these terms, such as hours of flight time terms. See how much he knows. So, what email should people use if they have more questions from the perspective of community involvement with the NWMO?
If you have James's email, James and I work together. We're either keeping a single point of contact. My name is Ulf. I work for the NWMO. If you Google NWMO and Ulf, you're going to find me. But keeping a flow of information in a consistent way. If you can send your emails through James, he will certainly give them to me to respond, and I think that makes sense.
Yeah, in one perspective, if you want your voice to be counted as an individual, for myself, as an MNO citizen, as a Region 7 Georgian Bay rights holder, I recognize that our rights are held collectively as part of the community. And so if you want your voice to be heard as part of your Metis rights, or part of the community, I always direct you to write to Tony or Roxanne or Taylor Answer sitting at the back there. So she's in the Lands and Resources branch of the MNO has been collating questions since 2009. And there's a couple of reports before that time that are on records as well. So that's it.
Terrific. So again, a really big thank you to NWMO for the presentation.
Merci for watching, and we hope you were able to expand your knowledge on not only nuclear waste management, but the nuclear industry itself. These engagement sessions are important because we need to educate ourselves on nuclear energy in order to make an informed decision. Whether you like or hate nuclear, it is important that you engage with the Nuclear Waste Management Organization to let them know how this deep geological repository is going to affect you and our community. While you can get in touch with the Nuclear Waste Management Organization itself, citizens are encouraged to engage with their community councils to let them know your opinions on the DGR and any questions or concerns you have about it. Merci for watching, and we'll see you down the river.